Welcome to All In for Estacada Schools. We'll be taking an in-depth look into the work, the data, the wins, and the fun that's happening every day in the Estacada School District. And now, your host, Superintendent Ryan Carpenter.
Good afternoon, Estacada School District. My name is Ryan Carpenter, and I proudly and humbly serve as your superintendent for Estacada Schools. I am so excited to have the opportunity to speak with our families live on Facebook for our All In series. I believe this is our 7th one. They continue to grow traction in terms of how many people view this. I'm so thankful that this has become such a productive two-way communication, and today is no different. In fact, today might be our biggest all-in thus far, as we've gone from podcast to social media live platform. We've got a lot of big conversations to talk about today. I know that there are so many different opinions and voice that would like to be shared when it comes to our calendar, as well as face masks, and I'm here to serve you and to listen to your voice and to try to answer any clarifying questions that might exist when it comes to the school district's proposed calendar and face masks. So today, the order of events is going to go like this. We're going to do my favorite segment, which is Fact or Fiction, where our great communication teams keeps an eye on social media and some things that are out there in the world. We want to have the opportunity to tell our side of the story. So is it fact? Is it fiction? We're going to lead off with that first today because we know we have so many important conversations to have about face masks and calendars. So Fact or Fiction, then Hot Topics, which should be the bulk of it. If you have questions about the calendar, or if you have questions about the face masks and or face covering mandate changes coming from the state of Oregon, I encourage you to start typing your questions and comments now. I anticipate today is going to be a busy one. I hope that today is a busy chat, and I very much look forward to having a larger question and dialogue section than we normally do in these Facebook Lives. So with that said, please grab a seat, stream this device to your TV if you want to, turn on your headphones a little bit louder, and let's start with the question of the day.
It's a polarizing time right now. Are you a cat or dog person?
It is a polarizing time. I will honestly say I did not see that question coming my way. I will honestly and transparently tell you that I would consider myself a dog person. At the Carpenter household, we actually have both. Currently, we have 3 dogs and 2 cats on the Carpenter property, and we love each and every one of them. You may not know this about me, but I am actually an avid hunter and fisherman, and I love to upland bird hunt, chukars and pheasants and grouse. And so I do have 3 dogs, a German Shorthair and 2 Brittany's, all of which I've trained myself to be upland bird hunters. They're pointer dogs. So I'm a dog person. I love training dogs. I love being in the field with dogs. This is the first 2 cats I've ever had in my life. They're barn cats, and they're actually quite cool as well. So I have both, but I would consider myself a dog person. Thanks for the question. Voice from above. Let's go quickly to Fact or Fiction. So obviously we like to take a look at social media and see what people are saying about the Estacada School District. We usually like to pick 1 or 2 that we'd like to address so that we can better clarify the comments that are out there. The first one is from an anonymous person, and here is what the Facebook post states. I wish the district would return to a traditional grading model, A through F. I believe that the standards-based grading limits a child's desire to achieve, and there is no incentive to work beyond what the standard is, even if they've mastered it. Also, standards-based grading limits the teacher's ability to teach anything that isn't within the standard. They are so focused on teaching the standard and fitting it into their day. There is no room for other subjects like history, spelling, or handwriting. And I think I want to address that just a little bit. First of all, I appreciate someone taking a concerted opinion and passion and posting it out there on social media for others to glom onto. I think that that's neat, and I appreciate that advocation. I do kind of want to break this post down just a little bit to better explain maybe some misunderstandings of standards-based grading when it comes to this post. So first and foremost, this parent is correct that K through 8, we have eliminated the alpha grades A through F because kindergarten through 8th grade, they don't matter and they never mattered. So even when you had A's and F's, maybe when you were in 3rd grade, it never really meant anything. And so that stays consistent today. We've chosen to better reflect and measure a kid's actual learning on standards, not some type of algorithmic summary to make an alpha grade, just to speak old school or traditional grading language. We do, however, still do A through F at the high school level. So once kids enter Estacada High School, at the end of the semester, they are assigned an alphanumeric grade. And the reasoning for that is because college institutions and transcripts still look at that. So to say that we don't do A or F isn't quite accurate. When it matters most at the high school, we do have letter grades A through F. The second sentence talks about standards-based grading limiting a child's desire to achieve, and there is no incentive to work beyond what the standard is. In fact, standards-based grading does the opposite. This sentence better describes traditional grading, and I'll tell you why. In traditional grading, an assignment like this person is referring to, let's say, is worth 100 points. And so if a child is only to score an F, that's 50 points or below out of 100 points. That is actually more devastating by research than to assign a kid a mastery and or an advanced or proficiency grade, which we would call a 3 or a 4. So in the old traditional model, and the statistic and research would prove this very true, if I as a teacher assigned you a 30 out of 100, you would be less likely to continue trying in my class statistically, and that 30 out of 100 on a summary or a sum algorithm to make that final alpha grade would be devastating to your overall grade, which we believe truly doesn't actually reflect learning at all. It's more of a punitive score that I, the teacher, gave you because on that moment, you did not demonstrate that you had the knowledge base of that certain skill. So in fact, standards-based grading does encourage students to push farther. If they scored a 2, which is almost proficient but not quite there, they're given multiple opportunities throughout the year to demonstrate that skill. No different than a kid who scores a 3, which is proficient. They still have opportunities throughout the year to demonstrate a 4, which would be at a mastery level. And so that sentence isn't quite true. In fact, referring back to the traditional grading would actually be more devastating for kids' motivation than standards-based grading. And that's statistically backed through lots of different research. And then the last one is that I'd like to address is they're so focused on teaching the standard and fitting it into the day, there's no room for other subjects like history, spelling, and or handwriting. And to some extent, that's true. You know, I know that there's a lot of opinions about, you know, the abolition ultimately of like learning cursive, which is true and not true. Obviously, it's not a required standard to advance to grade levels, nor is cursive writing a required standard for graduation. But I do know that we have teachers here in Estacada who are still teaching those things. And the thing that I think is really important to mention is because we're a standards-based grading, we're really measuring a kid's skill level. So to some extent, this allows for the freedom and flexibility for a teacher to be more flexible in terms of what they teach, because you can apply any content to master the skill. For example, using social studies as the example, if we're trying to defend an opinion with evidence, let's say that's the skill. It doesn't matter if I'm using the Cold War, World War II, the Revolutionary War. I can throw any content I want to, and at the end of the day, I'm measuring the kid's ability to demonstrate the skill. And so standards-based grading actually provides more freedoms and flexibilities for teachers to choose the curriculum and content that they want to deliver in order to measure the skill. I appreciate the old school approach to this. And again, for those of you who are my age and older, that's all we know. We grew up with a traditional grading-based model. So I understand your default position to want to go back to something that you're used to. But from the Estacada perspective, I do just want to share one final statistic. And that is when Estacada High School was doing a traditional A through F model like this person proposes, we had a 63% graduation rate. Since moving to standards-based grading and allowing multiple opportunities for kids to demonstrate that they truly, in fact, have learned the skill, we now have increased over time to a 91% graduation rate. So advocating for a traditional grading model would actually set our kids back. It would harm our kids. And so I'm just going to continue to focus and trust the data as that comes in, and what we're doing meets the needs of today's learner, and it supports our teachers in the great and tremendous work they're doing to actually grade learning, not behaviors. So yes, gone are the days of extra credit. I cry every morning that extra credit is gone, but we truly care about actual learning in this school district, and standards-based grading does that. So I appreciate that one. Hope I answered that. That was a long answer to a very great comment. So thank you for that anonymous post out there into the interweb of Facebook. I hope you got the results you wanted from your ask. This next one comes from a person, and they say this. This is kind of a funny one to me. I have an amazing idea. I imagine that's sarcastic. I'm sure there's some kind of, quote, diversity and inclusion officer and staff in the district. Fire them, put their paychecks towards something that does benefit the students, like the new HVAC system. I'd be willing to bet there are other staff who are superfluous and can be terminated as well, with their paychecks going to fund the various improvements that are being delayed. Then they won't need to raise taxes. Everybody wins. Well, thank you, Mr. Alex Pearson, for sharing your comment. Unfortunately, this proves your ignorance of the Estacada School District. And let me explain in the following ways. The Estacada School District does not have a diversity and inclusion officer, nor have we ever, nor do we intend to. I appreciate that you probably watch Fox News or CNN or some different types of national news media, and then make an immediate assumption that that's what's occurring in Estacada School District without actually checking any facts. We do not have any of those types of things that you see on the national media. We know that our community doesn't support that, nor does it fully represent the values inside the Estacada School District community. And so that position doesn't exist. We've been working very hard to upgrade and keep up with the modernization of what a school building needs to be to meet the needs of 21st century learning. Roughly 88, I believe, % of our budget does go to classroom teachers, building administrators, school counselors, cooks, custodians, bus drivers, etc. And so we pay a lot of money for people to come out and provide the best educational opportunity for Estacada's children. That leaves us with about 11% to buy school supplies, to buy textbooks and curriculum, to pay for the diesel that goes inside our buses, to pay for the oil that heats our inefficient facilities. And even on top of that, we bust our behinds to win grants. We've earned up to $3 million in grants so that we can update and upgrade and improve our facilities. And then we've also used a little over $2 million of our general fund money, which is in fact your taxpayers' funds, to continue to upgrade our facilities with roofs and windows and siding, and other various pieces of equipment to help us be better at offering today's kids the best education that we can provide. And so I just love sharing this one. And Alex, thank you for not having any clue about your local school district, but watching the national news media and accusing us of things that aren't true. I know that one's a little bit spicy on my end, but I struggle with that one because that accusation is just so far from the mission, vision, and values of the Estacada School District. I wanted to call that one out. So that's Fact or Fiction. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure the comments, I hope, are flooding in. This was a great start. And now we get to the hot topic. So here we go. All right, so we've got two big hot topics today, and I'm here to serve you, support your questions, your thoughts, and opinions when it comes to the school calendar and the COVID mask mandate. I'm going to start first with the COVID-19 protocols and changes that are being suggested and made at the state level. So here is a couple bullet points I want to work through together. So first, the Oregon Department of Education, in support from the Oregon Health Authority, so two state agencies, have announced for schools that no sooner than March 31st, face masks and local control will be restored to the district and county level. This is great news for the Estacada community, as the Estacada School Board of Directors has long advocated for local control in the middle of this pandemic. And so we are pleased to see the state move in the direction of allowing local school districts to have more decision-making authority and how it responds and attempts to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 on our local school campuses. We very much look forward to the opportunity of adjusting our protocols to meet the needs of our community and allow for family choice. There are also many obstacles that I do want to let parents know that do come with these suggested changes. And I want to state them just very quickly because I think it's important for families who are extremely excited about allowing masks to be optional for their kid or their spouse or yourself who works for our school district. There are some challenges. The first challenge is this. If you'll recall, at the beginning of this year and late last year, quarantining comes back into place. And so the reason why Oregon is allowing schools to participate in the test-to-stay process is because, again, they have determined that that is the best way to mitigate spread, is because the school district is a fully masked environment. The data would indicate that we're mitigating the spread on campus, ultimately allowing for students to test so that they could stay in their classrooms. Once we move to an optional masking environment, that test to stay no longer comes into play because it's no longer a, quote, secured masked environment. And so you may be in great support of moving towards the opportunity for kids and adults to make the choice. But with that choice also comes the understanding that we will most likely be sending more kids home at the beginning of this change because of the quarantining requirements of this new Ready Schools, Safe Learner guidance coming from the Department of Education. With the current masking rules, we also need only to draw a 3-foot circle around a masked child and or employee. Once masks become optionals again, that circle becomes a 6-foot circle again, making the swath of the kids that the school district will be required to quarantine will be greater. And so, again, we're a school district that is excited about these changes coming. It's going to allow us as a school district to better represent and reflect our community's values in large. But at the same time, I think it's important that we start preparing our community around the conversation of us having to send students home due to quarantining protocols and procedures. And that's just going to be a nature of the progression as we start to open up our schools to look more normal when it comes to face covering wearing. How long is the quarantine, some might ask? Quarantines are still 5 days, and isolation periods are still 5 days as well. One thing that the Department of Education is requiring in the changes to Ready Schools, Safe Learners is that if a student and or adult who's not vaccinated tests positive and has to isolate for 5 days, they can return back to school campus on day 6, but they are then required to wear a face mask. I have some concerns about what that looks like and the protocols inside of that. So by no means are we out of the woods yet, but it's 45 days until that law and rule changes, the Ready School Safe Learner guidance changes, and I'm hoping that some other changes will come with language to make the logistics a little bit more efficient for our school district. So I have some concerns about the logistics. We are excited about the direction of this change, and we're building how to execute it right now. So I think I'll stop there. I know that was a little bit mixed in terms of how I answer that, and I really probably just want to spend more time being able to target specific questions and comments about that. But Maggie, what do we have so far?
Thank you. And I just want to say, first of all, we have an outstanding turnout today with about 80 viewers live, and it looks like we're approaching 40 questions. So we're going to work through these, and we're going to address the COVID-19 questions first of all. So one of our first questions regarding the mask changes is, will vaccinated children now need to quarantine if they are exposed in an unmasked setting?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer to that is no. And so if a child is fully vaccinated, and the definition of fully vaccinated is both shots, so shot number 1 and shot number 2 of Pfizer, Moderna, I think Johnson & Johnson is 1, although I'm not sure if kids under 18 can take that, so forgive me if I'm right or wrong on that. But as long as they're fully vaccinated, they do not need to quarantine. Students who are not vaccinated and employees who are not vaccinated would need to quarantine. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And this is a good question to segue into the next one, because that is just about the only way that we differentiate between vaccinated and unvaccinated children, because we really don't want those students to be separated. Another parent had a question about, do we anticipate vaccinated and unvaccinated children being treated differently as we shift towards new protocols?
I am honestly concerned about that, yes. That's something that we need to take this time to make sure that we're being fair and equitable to all kids. We need to start proactively, and that's not just the schools, that's the role and responsibility of our parents as well. It's a shared responsibility, but we do need to start establishing, which Estacada is actually doing a pretty good job, but we need to continue to establish a culture where we promote and support choice, which means that it is okay if someone continues to choose to still wear a face covering. That's okay. It's also okay if somebody chooses to no longer wear their face covering, and to each choice is their own. And I would like our school district to continue to welcome and support choice and support that through the entire process. And so I do hope that we can build that culture. I am worried about some of the protocol language that's in place where students may be back wearing a face mask just because they're required to due to quarantine and isolation issues. But I think that One thing I don't want people to create a vision of is that nobody is going to wear a face mask. And so when these kids come back, they'll be the only ones wearing a face mask. I actually anticipate an environment where there's going to be lots of kids and employees wearing face coverings still, and lots of kids and employees who are not. And again, the Estacada School District supports the choice. We're happy to be able to offer the choice at some point through this. But I don't want anyone to misunderstand that the Estacada School District is saying that this will be a no mask environment. We support the choice, and we want to allow people to make that choice. So there will be a lot of people still wearing face coverings. I'm sure of that.
Thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. Another question we have is, will we utilize metrics of hospitalization and infection rates to drive our local mask policy?
The answer to that at the moment is no, we will not, but that could be subject to change. So we know that things other than schools, like grocery stores, restaurants, they're being managed and or observed by the county and the state using hospitalization metrics as things open up. That's why you might see the language that that grocery stores may make masks optional before March 31st. And that's because they're using metrics like hospitalizations and emergency bed openings to help support them in that decision. The schools run completely separate from that. And so the language in schools says that it will not be sooner than March 31st that masks will allowed to be optional. And at this point, there is no metrics that we will use to determine that. We're just going to follow the guidance and the language from the state in the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidelines. And if that changes, then we'll move in that direction as well. But right now, I don't see that happening in our future.
Thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. I think one important thing to note as well is that we don't interpret local infection rates or hospitalization rates because we are here to be educators and we are not the public health experts. So that's why we leave it up to our local public health and why we follow the guidance of our local public health, which we will continue to do. Our next question is, as we move towards a potentially unmasked setting, can a non-vaccinated child who is not wearing a mask do test to stay if they are exposed?
The answer to that in the current proposal is no to that answer. So if they are not vaccinated and not masked, and they have been identified as someone who is exposed to a positive case inside a 6-foot circle, they then are required to quarantine, and the test to stay protocols actually no longer exist once our school district makes a determination to make masks optional. That ability is gone. We will test to stay for those who are vaccinated or those who just want to test because they're not feeling well and they want to make sure that they don't have COVID. We do have that ability, but the test to stay goes away when masks become optional. So I know that that's part of the challenge that we need to work through as we prepare our systems to support that. And I do want to say we have a quarantine school in place. And obviously because we've had test to stay and we've really done a pretty good job really of mitigating the virus on our campus, we haven't had to leverage that quarantine school as much as I'm anticipating we're going to need to. But we have teachers on the ready who are ready to serve and support kids who move to quarantine school. I can tell you that I've had a kid, actually 2 kids now, go through that quarantine school, and it was a wonderful experience. So I'm very proud. I think that the transition will be seamless. I know it's not ideal. I know it inconveniences families, but again, if we want our masks to be optional, like I believe our community does, that's one of the sacrifices we're going to need to be prepared to make as we move in that direction.
Thank you. Our next question is, if we go to optional masks, but a student is wearing a mask, even in that setting, and they are exposed, are they able to do test to stay, or do they still need to quarantine?
Unfortunately, they also need to quarantine if they're unvaccinated. Not fully vaccinated is probably a better way to say that. So because, again, the mask environment is no longer a guaranteed fully masked environment, and again, I'm speaking the language that's coming from the state. If they're exposed in that unmasked environment, it is irrelevant if they're wearing a mask or not. They still will need to quarantine due to the exposure.
Thank you. Our next question is, will a child have to be vaccinated in order to not wear a mask?
No is the answer to that question. So as I read the language and interpret the language, it sounds like anybody, regardless of vaccination status, does have the ability to choose if they want to wear a mask or not. The one exception to that is employees who are employed to work, contracted to work for the Estacada School District. There is law that was signed by Governor Kate Brown, I would say 2 or 3 months ago. I was longer than that, but there was a mandatory time where employees either had to show proof of vaccination or they went through the exemption, a religious and or medical exemption to not be vaccinated. That went very well inside our school district, but the law requires that if an employee went through the religious or medical exemption, the school district is required to go above and beyond for those folks. So those employees would, in theory, need to still be required to wear a face covering because of their choice to not be vaccinated by the religious and or medical exemption.
It looks like one of our next questions I wanted to address also from Nicole. We have been proponents of local decision, but we also rely on public health. So kind of how does that work? And I'll turn that over to you in a moment, Superintendent Carpenter. But one thing I think is important to note is that while we follow state guidelines, if county guidelines are stricter by our public health, we also have to follow those as well, which is a little bit more localized to our area. Superintendent Carpenter, if there's anything you want to add on that.
No, you're saying that right. Obviously, the state, because we're a state public education agency, the state determines what the protocols, policies, and procedures are. In this specific pandemic, they have granted authority for the state to make decisions, and they've also granted authority for local county health departments to also have authority to make decisions. And so really throughout this pandemic, we have been beholden to and attached in most cases to decisions that were made either by local county health and or state health. The good news is as this pandemic has evolved to what it is today, the state and local county is starting to allow local school districts to make their own decisions again. And this is where the optional masking comes into play.
All right, thank you. It looks like that is about rounding out our COVID-19 questions. We have a lot of calendar questions, so
all right.
We can move into the calendar segment and then we'll answer some great calendar questions.
Okay, well, it sounds like there's a lot of calendar questions, and I really want to honor the time today for some great two-way dialogue and communication. And so what I will just say is I hope that our parents and families have had the opportunity to view the proposed calendar. I do want to state that it is a proposed calendar. As we take a look at the research and data, as we listen to the voice of our students, our employees, and our parents, we wanted to create a calendar that met the needs of our community as well as supported research-based best teaching and learning strategies for today's learner. And that's what you're seeing today. And what we're talking about today is that proposal. I know for our community, to some extent, this is a non-traditional school calendar proposal. And I'm excited to have that conversation with our families today in hopes that I can better clarify some why behind some of those decisions and why we're proposing it to you and asking for your support inside of that. At the end of the day, this decision, though, ultimately falls upon the elected executive school board of directors. And they have asked me to collect your voice and share your voice to them so that they can make the most informed decision, weighing what is research-based best for students in today's world and in today's climate when it comes to teaching and learning, when it comes to focusing on retaining the great employees that we currently have, as well as recruiting more talent to come out here and teach the great kids of the Estacada School District and meet the individual, unique, and personal needs of our community and family. It's a very tough decision, and our school board is doing this with grace, thoughtfulness, and really elegance as they navigate and listen as they prepare to make a big decision. So I'm very excited to have this conversation today. I'm going to try my best to answer everything in its fullness so that you can have a better understanding of how we got here and hopefully get behind it and support it. I am behind this calendar. I really believe it will set our school district up for long-term success and allow us to be able to thrive outside of this pandemic. One little statement that I do want to point out that I think is relevant before we go to the questions is the need for the Estacada School District, and really all public school districts at large, need to begin competing. As many of you know, as this pandemic hit and as public education, the traditional sense that we once knew it as they shut down and served kids in comprehensive distance learning, as we came back and executed some controversial protocols that were required by the state, a lot of families chose to leave their neighborhood school district and go to private school. They chose to homeschool, and they chose to be a part of some form of charter school as well. And so one of the things that I'm proud of is the Estacada School District has been extremely agile and innovative, and we've done non-traditional things to meet the needs of our families during this pandemic. Did you know that we are the only school district in Clackamas County, Multnomah County, and Washington County to maintain our enrollment throughout this entire pandemic? Other school districts, some of them large ones, have literally lost thousands of kids to competition, charter schools, home schools, and private schools. And so another reason why I want to share this with you is because it's important that as we look at the future of public schooling, your school district, the Estacada School District, needs to compete with other choice options that parents get to make when it comes to educating their children. And so it might be easy to think, let's just go back to the way that it once was. Unfortunately, we will not be able to attract the people who left, who are now enjoying a 4-day school week, or who are now enjoying education in a more innovative way. And so I look forward to instilling the values that we've created that public education is, which is so special. It's why I've devoted my life to public education. I believe in it that much. But as your leader, it's also critical that I propose new and innovative ways to meet the needs of today's family and today's learner while still offering free and public education to a community. And I believe this calendar meets a lot of those boxes. And I can't wait to have a conversation with you today about it. So with that said, Maggie, to honor that time, let's fire away.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions that we're going to work through. So I want to thank everyone that's going to hang in there with us through them. So one question, you mentioned competing. Why do we need to compete for more students? Why is that something we're paying attention to?
Well, that's a good question. And I guess it's because we care about meeting the needs of Estacada's children. Obviously, we are a one-size-fits-all school district, but inside that box, there's a lot of different specific needs. And we know that the Estacada School District is the heartbeat of the Estacada community. We know that we're a sense of pride. And we think it's important that we find new and innovative ways to meet those needs. And thus far, we've actually been extremely successful. The parent satisfaction of our school district has grown through this pandemic. Our employee engagement has grown, as well as our student engagement. And so there's a lot of data that we're looking at that tells us that we're on the right track. And again, it's important as we think about what the future looks like for Estacada's kids and Estacada's schools, we need to find new ways to meet those needs. And again, to answer the question ultimately is the number one reason why we're here is to really foster and support a welcoming and rigorous academic environment for children. And what today's children is, the children who are growing up in 2022, is considerably different than when I grew up at the same age in the 90s and the early 2000s. And so I think it's important to recognize first and foremost that the needs of today's kid who was born with a cell phone, born with an iPad, and born with different approaches to what schooling is. We need to meet those needs, and we need to create a calendar that supports that. Your school district is employed by over 50% of millennials. That's a child or a kid, not even a kid, they're an adult now, but that's a person who was born really in the 1982 area. I'm a millennial. I'm one of the oldest ones, but we're over 50% employed by millennials. To meet their needs requires a different approach as well. And so it's a long, complex answer to that question, and there's a lot of moving parts to that. But at the end of the day, we need to offer a free and appropriate public education to its kids, and we want to put something together that can meet the different needs of our community.
Thank you. One comment that I saw that floated in, and there are a lot coming in right now, but I thought it was worth mentioning, was adding more students with our current facilities makes it hard to set students up for success. And we agree, we know our facilities are near capacity, but we have a responsibility as a public education school district to serve every student that is in our community that walks through our doors. So that's one thing that we take very seriously. Another question that was related on growth is, have we looked at other communities that are growing at a similar rate, and are they experiencing that same enrollment growth?
That's a good question. I'm going to pause just for a second because I'm not sure if we're still live. We're experiencing some technical difficulties here. Okay, getting the double thumbs up that it's still live. So I appreciate that question, and I think there were kind of two questions inside of that. So first and foremost, because we are a public education institution, we don't get to choose if we're growing too much or growing too slowly. We are required to serve all kids who walk in our doors, regardless of their walk of life. You are correct that our capacity is tight. We've been saying that for a couple of years now. We just, thankfully, due to federal ESSER funds, which was provided by 2 ESSER funds from the Trump administration and 1 from the Biden administration, we have been able to add 2 portable buildings at River Mill Elementary School, allowing for 4 additional classroom space. 1 of those is being used now. We proactively put those in there to anticipate growth. Our growth has exceeded to use 1 of those classrooms this year, and we expect that to happen again. The growth is real. We're trying to tell our community that that is real, and we need some help and support, because at the end of the day, it's going to be more portables that we'll be purchasing to support that growth. We're excited about the growth. I know that has mixed feelings about the growth, but at the end of the day, we are required to serve all people who come to our schools. That's a mission we take very seriously, and we're doing what we can, again, inside our general fund and the grants that are provided to us to do that on our own dime. At some point, though, the community does have to recognize that they will need to, at some point, invest in their schools to support the growth, to help us update our electrical and efficient infrastructure. Unfortunately, our community is just not quite ready for that yet, but we're going to continue to have those conversations and continue to ask for that support.
Thank you. Another question that we're getting that a couple of people have asked that I'm going to paraphrase a little bit is about data. Have we surveyed parents on the 4-day school week, and what were the results of that survey and other surveys that we've done about the 4-day school week?
Yeah, we have. We've surveyed families twice recently. And when I say recently, we surveyed last spring when we were trying to make a decision. If you'll recall, we were a 4-day school week last year. And we moved back to a 5-day school week this year. So we surveyed our families last spring, and our survey in last spring was overwhelming. 82% of families supported the 4-day week. We surveyed again this fall and had tremendous participation in our parent satisfaction survey. And again, it was over 80%. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I know it was over 80% supportive of the 4-day week. And then inside that survey and in other different platforms where parents have had the opportunity to provide comments and opinions, I guess there's two main themes that are coming from our parents in general right now, but it's overwhelming. Like it's an overwhelming two themes. And the first is support for the 4-day week. And the second is parents and families' lack of support behind the early release Wednesdays. We're being told loud and clear that the early release Wednesdays are burdensome. And so this is also our proposal to meet the voice of our parents who struggle with their early release Wednesdays. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. Another follow-up question on that was how many families took those surveys, just about the accuracy of the data. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look through our archives and post a couple of screenshots that we did have from those surveys. But if memory serves, we had about 500 to 600 families complete the survey last year, which is a decent segment of the family population. We would always love to hear from more of our families.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But yeah, it was a number that made us feel like, yeah, this captures our families. And it wasn't a tiny demographic by any means. It was like Maggie said, 500 or 600, which was pretty overwhelming. And again, if we're choosing or proposing an outcome that you don't agree with, and you feel like you've missed those surveys or didn't get your opportunity to share your voice, I strongly encourage that you participate. We do our parent satisfaction survey twice a year. It is an extremely important survey. We build goals and action plans to try to improve the scores inside of that parent satisfaction survey. And so we'll be doing one again coming up in kind of March, April. We'll be sure to let you know. But another parent satisfaction survey is coming. And that is one of the core pillars of our strategic plan, is measuring our growth at how parents are viewing their child's school district. So I encourage you to take those surveys. We really do make decisions from them.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. On the topic of parent voice also, we've gotten a couple of questions about, are we answering all the questions this evening? How does that work? There are a lot of questions this evening, so some are grouped based off of theme, just so we can get everyone's questions and concerns answered. But one thing I do want to say is that we document every question or even comments that aren't just questions that we're addressing here, but we document all of them in an Excel spreadsheet and then share them with our building leaders so they get to know what parents are wondering about so they can answer those as well. And Superintendent Carpenter and I's email is always open if you're watching later and want to ask us a question or have a question answered later on. Another question theme we are getting is around childcare. There's concerns about having childcare on the Fridays and on the October and May break days. Does the district have a plan for addressing those childcare needs?
A little bit, yes, we do. We understand that from a childcare perspective or two working families, etc., that these proposed changes create additional challenges above, I would imagine, winter break, spring break, and summer break for families who need to find childcare. I also imagine a lot of families needed childcare on Wednesdays when it was early release as well. So we acknowledge that, and we understand that this proposal does inconvenience our families in certain perspectives. I am having conversations at the school district level to try to offer some form of childcare opportunities on Fridays. We already have a childcare on campus. We're looking to potentially add an additional one. And there are other childcare opportunities throughout our community. And I hope that this potential demand will spark more entrepreneurship of people willing to step up and create their own childcare businesses to support that potential growing need. But we do understand that that's a real con or potential barrier to this proposed plan. But we also know that childcare and families are working hard, and childcare is always an issue, and we recognize that as well.
And I know childcare is difficult, maybe with the schedules that are being proposed, but could you talk a little bit about, we've gotten a couple questions also on overall hours in the seat. How does this proposal compare with this school year in terms of how many hours our students are actually spending time learning in the classrooms?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. That has been one of the most frequently asked questions, is the time. And it is true. This calendar proposal actually has kids in school for more time over the entire school year than our current 5-day proposal that we're in now. So in today's time, today's school year, the elementary school kids are in school for 5.3 hours, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And they're in school for 3.3 hours on those early release Wednesdays. The middle school is about 5.6 hours on full days and 3.5 hours on Wednesdays. The high school is in school for 5.75 hours. This is kids in school. This is not employees, kids. And 3.6 hours on Wednesdays. Ultimately, the high school is in school for 993 hours this year. The middle school, 975 hours. And 912 hours, respectively, at the elementary school. In this proposed calendar, kids are in school 4 days a week full-time for 5.8 hours at the elementary school. Counting our calendar, that moves us to 917 hours. So elementary kids are in school for 5 hours longer under this proposal than they would be in the traditional calendar. Middle school kids are at 1,015 hours is our proposal. So just doing rough math, that's about 40 additional hours. And the high school is also at 1,015, and that puts them at just about 25 hours more than they are this year. So it's something that we took note on. Our teachers, our building principals really wanted to serve and support kids longer. The 4-day school day allows us to support kids longer. Our employees are working longer on those days, and that doesn't count the opportunities on Fridays where our teachers and teams will be looking at data and selecting kids to be able to work in smaller groups with more targeted teaching and learning opportunities. And those will be additional hours for those kids, and that will vary throughout the school year. And so I'm excited about that innovative opportunity as well.
All right, thank you. And we've gotten a lot of questions over the past few days, and I know this is breaking news that we just finalized some proposed school times. So could we share what those school times are looking like at this point?
Sure. And again, I want to point out, and it should come up on the screen as well, but ultimately what we're proposing, and again, this is just a proposal, is an Estacada High School time for kids. Starts at 8:15 and ends at 3:45. The same applies to Estacada Middle School. Clackamas River and Rivermill Elementary School would start at 7:45 and 7:55, and their school days would end at 2:35 and 2:45 respectively. So from a logistics perspective, what you're seeing here is a single start time and a single bus route, which we do on Wednesday mornings, and we're able to do that quite effectively and efficiently. But we also know in our community it's important to send our elementary schools home on different buses than our secondary students, as well as this allows us to offer more classroom time at the high school and middle school levels. And so we'll do a double run in the afternoons, Monday through Thursday. It is important to note, though, that this is just a concept and a proposal. The reason why we're sharing these proposed start and stop times with you, because in general, the parents in the community has generally been pretty accepting of this calendar proposal. And so now they're asking about time and on Fridays. And we're so excited to be moving in this direction to really share with families conceptually what that school day might look like. So I'm pleased that we're to this point, and I'm excited to share this with you at this point in our rollout procedures and our voice that we're collecting right now. So these are the proposed times, subject to change, of course, based on voice. We want to continue to work with our employees and our building principals to support that. But we think this is a good time that still gets kids out at 3:45, allowing them to participate in athletics or extracurricular activities, and it still provides time in the evening for our youth athletics to be able to utilize the fields as well. So this was a very thought out time proposal, and I hope that that helps alleviate some of your thoughts and questions as well after seeing that.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. Another question is, I was seeing on the school times those read days. Could you talk about what those days are going to look like and how students are selected for those days? Are IEP students always required to be there on read days? What does that look like?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's important again to say that the read days are still under construction. We're still building them as we go, using all sorts of different data points to help us in that decision making. But ultimately, READ stands for Responsive Extension. So the extension would be an example of us selecting kids who are already demonstrating proficiency or mastering, and it's an opportunity for us to extend the learning opportunities for them. The I stands for intervention, and those would be the students who are not meeting the essential learning standard and or the skill level, and so we need to pull them in for some targeted reteaching or measuring again to make sure that we're supporting that kid. And then the development stands for helping our teachers be better at their craft and helping our support staff better serve inside the classroom. And so what we're thinking right now conceptually, and again I'm talking at a very broad level, is for the first 2 hours of the morning, roughly from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, school buildings, mainly run by classroom teachers, building principals, school counselors, learning specialists, paraeducators, would ultimately hand select, based on data and their PLC teams, certain groups of kids to come in and be served and supported by their teachers or by the specialists that have selected them. At the high school, that could look a little bit more open and flexible because kids have the ability to drive. We will be running bus routes for these Fridays to help pick up and support the kids coming into class, especially for those working families. If a child is on an IEP, it does not guarantee that they will be selected to come in on Fridays. Again, we're using the data and we're making decisions to basically create small groups and a more personal opportunity for teachers to work with kids. So it is likely that a kid may be selected on week 1 and week 2 to come in on Fridays, but then not selected on week 3 because our teachers have chosen maybe a different data point or the buildings have chosen something, a different approach to meet the needs of different groups of kids. I also want to point out that it won't be a one-size-fits-all Friday. What the high school does may be different than what River Mill Elementary School does. And I like the agility and the ability, the innovation for our teachers to have the ability to mold a Friday to meet the needs of what they want to do to support kids based on their learning data and extension opportunities. So that's the general conception of what Fridays look like. We will be feeding kids as well, but the specifics have not been ironed out, and probably starting next week or the week after, we will begin designing actual plans at the building levels, and we'll be communicating that. We're just taking it steps at a time. We're first rolling out the calendar conception. It seems to be received relatively well in general. We know that there are some concerns, and we're excited about talking about those concerns today. We're now talking about start and stop times, what bell schedules will look like, and then we'll move next to what those read days look like.
All right, and we had a couple of follow-up questions on that. Are read days required for families and students to attend?
They are not. Nope. Fridays is not considered and or counted technically as a student contact school day from that perspective. It will be counted that way for our food and meal services, but nonetheless, no. Our teachers will select students and families have the option if they want their kids to come to school or not. It's not going to be an attendance taking day. We hope that our schools will make things fun, exciting, and engaging in a way that kids want to come on Fridays and be a part of this. We hope to have your support, that if a teacher says, hey, your kid is struggling, I want to take this time to work with him or her, we hope that you'll support that and say, yes, this is a great opportunity for my kid to come down with a small group of other kids, and we can really get surgical in making sure that your kid is learning the things that they need to. So I do hope for support in that. But at the end of the day, if you say, nope, we're going to the beach, that's your call. It's Friday.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. We're going to shift a little bit now to a question that many people have as well, so I'm going to condense some questions. Did we throw a dart at the calendar when we were selecting 2 weeks off in the middle of the year, or was this a part of a grander scheme? Why do we have 2 weeks off, one in October, one in May?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and another frequently asked question that I've had the opportunity to answer quite a bit really throughout this process. And again, looking first at research-based best practice. The research that's coming out post-pandemic is strongly advocating for balancing out the school year more frequently with social emotional breaks for kids and for employees. And so as we try to create a new-aged, innovative school calendar to meet the needs of today's learner and today's employee, we tried to reflect what that research says, and that's trying to build in more breaks throughout the course of the school year. The second reason is the research says that a lot of learning is lost in the summertime, and our teachers work extremely hard to close some gaps already created just by the natural demographic of our community. We're really doing quite impressive things when you break down the demographics of Estacada. The achievement that's occurring here is quite impressive. And each and every year we start with a big gap, and we work hard all year long to close that gap. And so in this calendar, it does advocate for reducing summer by 2 weeks, ultimately. We start a week earlier than we traditionally do, and we end a week earlier than we traditionally do, just to make even the smallest effort to try to reduce that summer slide. Now, it's important to note that those 2 weeks, one in the front end and one in the back end, is balanced inside the school year, so it ultimately equals the same. It just reduces the summer slide by 2 weeks and creates social emotional breaks. So why the first week of October, you ask? Mainly because if you draw your line between where we start on August 29th, the week before Memorial Day, that's 5 weeks of school to this proposed break, and then 6 weeks to Thanksgiving break. So this break is literally placed right smack dab in the middle, or balanced, inside the start of our school year. I will also tell you that the data would tell us, and it does tell us, that this first week of October is our worst student attendance of the entire year. This traditionally is when we have the least amount of students show up regularly to their classes. And so it's convenient that it's a halfway mark, but it's also specific because it's our least attended student week. The May break is also very similar. It's the halfway mark between March and the end of the school year. The reason why we have also selected a week off in May is because the data indicates that the whole month of May is our worst employee attendance month. That's when our employees are calling in sick, taking their vacation time, or their family illness leave during this month. And so knowing that this is also at the end of state testing, when fatigue of students, parents, and employees is at its all-time high, we're placing a proposed break right in the middle of that, so that when we come back in June to finish the school year, we're able to do so full of energy, full of enthusiasm, and putting a strong finish to a school year. And so I support the placement of both of these. We use data and we use research to place them here. if you'll notice, if you saw some earlier calendar iterations, that week in May was actually the second week of May. Our team made the decision to move that to the week before Memorial Day, because that is when the completion of state testing occurs. And so we were contemplating having one state test, we'll call it math, and then we were going to take a break, and then we were going to do the language arts state test. Our team of experts decided that we'd rather knock out math and language arts, and then everybody take a break when everyone is fatigued and the pressure was high, and then we come back and finish the end of June strong. So that's why the placement is. And I do want to point out too, for those of you who are still paying close attention, and I so much appreciate this, I understand that my answers may not be popular. You may not agree with them, and I can't see the comments, so I'm sure that there are comments and opinions about what I'm saying. And I understand that, and I'm not saying this hoping that you will all 100% completely agree with me, but I do want to mention, like, we, the school district, are being transparent. We're trying to communicate the why behind these decisions. And so I hope that helps inform you to make the opinion and the decision that you want to make about this. But by no means do I hope that you think that I'm up here trying to sell anything. I'm trying to answer your questions, and I hope at the minimum you at least appreciate the transparency.
Thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. And I appreciate, and I think the community appreciates, just having an opportunity for them to better understand what's being proposed, just so they can know how it can impact their families. Another question was, when we talk about extending the school year out to help prevent that summer slide that really helps our students academically, there are some concerns about heat. Our buildings do not have air conditioning. Has the district thought about that, and what are some of our thoughts?
Yes. In fact, that's another major theme and con, I would think, that has come up in this calendar proposal. We know that we could potentially be adding a week in the hotter months of the fall, as well as a week in the hotter months of the summer. And again, we recognize that and understand that. Again, we have asked our community a few times now to help support the investment of our schools to create a more climate-controlled environment for our kids in our community and for today's learners. At this point, it's already hot in those classrooms, so adding a week on both ends does become potentially problematic. There are two things that I'm working on because we are aware of this. The first is the school board of directors and I are going to begin having conversations as we prepare our budget for next year as to how we can make some form of a 4 or 5 year commitment to chip away at the climate control opportunities inside our schools' classrooms. That's obviously a multi-million-dollar investment. We don't have that, and so we would need to chip away at that over time. This is where I get disappointed and discouraged a little bit that our community hasn't yet supported our bond ask to support some of those very important learning things. But that's just where we're at today, and I want to have more conversations with our community about that. However, the second opportunity that does exist, because we've moved to virtual inclement weather days. So imagine a snow day, right? If it snows in the next month or two, we may call a virtual snow day where the learning continues and the school day still happens. It's just not on campus. I can see if temperatures get to extreme heat, I see this no different, and we would potentially call a virtual inclement weather day. If it is truly so hot in a classroom that it disrupts the learning environment, we have some new options and opportunities at our disposal to make some decisions to support the learning environment, and that can be done virtually. And that's another example of innovation coming from the Estacada School District to meet the needs of today's families.
All right, thank you for responding to that question. Another question that we had a couple of questions on in the comment section was around student athletes. How does this shift in the school year, extending the summer out, and also the longer school days? How does that impact our student athletes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can tell you that I came to the Estacada School District from a 4-day school calendar. I was a football, basketball, and baseball coach inside of that, so I've experienced fall, winter, and spring. So let me tell you about the advantages first. The first advantage is that on Fridays, which is primarily a heavy travel day, in a current traditional systems, our athletes miss a lot of class time because they need to get on a bus at a certain time. By moving to a 4-day week actually allows our students to miss less school time due to Fridays being a major travel day. And so that is definitely a pro when it comes to that process. I also think the balanced school year will also be an advantage to our student athletes. For one, I believe that learning breaks are important and it freshens up the mind as long as they're short and we can keep them under control. But it's also during that time when athletes just get to be athletes. And maybe they get to have an earlier practice time. Maybe coaches and programs get to do something special to build more team chemistry. Maybe they have the opportunity to participate in tournaments and different events that they couldn't do because the traditional calendar prohibited those opportunities. So the opportunities are there. One of the frequent questions I am asked, which I think is a part of this question, is if we move forward with the fall break and move forward with the May break, what about those additional break times? And my answer is it's the same as we treat winter break and spring break. So being a former baseball coach and a former high school and college baseball player, I have never had a spring break. I made that decision when I chose to play baseball that during the springtime and spring break, I'd be playing games and or traveling somewhere with my team. As a high school basketball player, I always had practices during those 2 weeks of winter break. It just comes with the nature of the sport. The same for wrestling, I'm sure. And then also, as a high school football player, my daily doubles and my summer workouts always started at the beginning of August. And so that doesn't change as well. We know that we'll have early workouts. We know that we'll have conditioning. We know that we'll have daily doubles. And the calendar doesn't really impact either of those opportunities. They will still remain the same as well. So I think there's some advantages. 3:45 is a little bit later. So in some of the late football, late soccer seasons, we will have some darkness issues that we'll need to address because school is out roughly a half an hour later than it is today. But the good news is our school board and our community is investing in a turf facility, which will allow for practice times to run later under the lights. And so this investment, albeit I think is a phenomenal investment, long-term investment for our community, also provides opportunities for our student athletes to practice even with light being a barrier.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. Another question that I really appreciated was, can we talk at all about, there was an OSU report that recently came out about math scores being lower with a 4-day school week. And I do want to mention that I will be linking in the comment section after this All In Live some of the research that we've used to guide us in this decision about the 4-day school week. But Superintendent Carpenter, I'm not sure if you've seen that article or if you have anything that you wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I actually have read that article. It just came out I want to say a week ago or so, and I read it cover to cover. And yes, it could be easy to discern from reading that the math scores are directly correlated to the 4-day week because that's the way that article was presented. But what it really meant was in that 4-day week that the Oregon State University was covering, it was less instructional time than their traditional classes. And so a lot of the research would tell you that test scores are predicated upon the amount of instructional hours that a kid has. And the data would say that a kid's actual score, they've got the metadata that would prove this, that the metadata would say that each kid's test scores would move up or down a standard deviation based on the hour more or less that they were in a school, inside a school desk or inside the school system. And so what I'm proud to share with you is inside this 4-day week, we actually increase instructional hours. And so my hypothesis or the data would suggest that actually we will see an increase in test scores because, again, the data fluctuates on the actual hours, not on the calendar, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. Another question that we had, and it looks like we're winding down on questions, so we might collect some miscellaneous questions towards the end. But what other districts around us and how many other districts are doing this 4-day school week thing?
Thank you so much for asking. This is data that I've been wanting to share all day. So in the state of Oregon, 49% of school districts operate on a 4-day school calendar. Is a good way to say that. 49%, so almost 50-50. It's a coin flip in the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon is the 11th most state with 4-day school weeks. So there are actually 10 other states who have a higher percentage of school districts that are at a 4-day school week. So I hope, if nothing else, that's a fun party fact for you. But really it's 50-50, and it's based on the needs of the community. We know that a lot of Eastern Oregon and rural communities go to 4-day. Their reasoning is different than my reasoning, and they're different than our community's reasoning in proposing this calendar. And so it's to each his own, but it's a 49-51 split.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Carpenter. So it looks like our questions are starting to wind down. One question that just came in is, how many of the districts that are doing the 4-day week have a shorter summer break?
I think a lot of them, and some of the reason for that is because what they do on Fridays. A lot of the rural Eastern Oregon schools actually have a longer school year because they literally have nothing on Friday. They don't pay their employees to work, and they have no school whatsoever. And so they're literally doing a 4-day school week, and so their school year starts longer and ends longer than ours. Ours lines up perfectly with traditional 4-day weeks that work their employees and support students in some capacity on Fridays. Even including starting before Labor Day is also a very common start time for school districts. So I would say that in this balanced model, our calendar probably ends a week later than most traditional 4-day weeks. But again, that's because we're proposing, based on research, social emotional support, and trying to recruit and retain talent, we're proposing balancing out the school year a little bit to intentionally make our school district a little bit different.
All right, thank you. Another question that is a fun one is, if we are expanding the minutes in the school day, does that mean that school periods, class periods, are going to be longer, and how does that balance out with students having pretty short attention spans? Are we worried about keeping kids engaged?
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question, and one that our building principals and their leadership teams are working on now. So obviously with this proposed calendar, it gives all of our school buildings an opportunity to take a deeper look at what the bell schedules looks like. So in general, by having kids longer in the school day, there will be a different approach as to how we serve and support kids. I know currently the high school and middle school are running block schedules. Right now they're working with their teams to see what a different approach might look like. They too are focused on student engagement, as well as their own lesson ability to be able to offer an engaging lesson in a certain amount of time as well, and to allow good passing time, to allow appropriate time for kids to dress down and participate in athletics, in electives. And so there's a lot that comes into this. And then at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we can still have transportation to move them back and forth. So this portion of our calendar is still under construction. It's literally like where we're at right now in terms of building out this calendar. But I think that your question is a legitimate one, and it's one we're literally working through as a system right now.
All right, another question that we had is, For in-service days, are those scheduled on Fridays to kind of maximize the student days? And that's a great question. We do have grading days built into Fridays. And another way we're maximizing student learning is on days where we have a Monday holiday, let's say Martin Luther King Day, President's Day. We have shifted the student week to Tuesday through Friday. So we're really thoughtfully trying to maximize student time. Another question we have is, does this schedule at all relate to block schedules, and what does that look like in our school buildings?
Sure, and the answer, the short answer is yes. Block schedules could absolutely apply to a 4-day week. In fact, to some extent, we're currently kind of running, especially at the high school, a 4-day week now, where our block schedules run Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Wednesday is really a shorter day where more intervention time is taking place, and kids are still going through their block schedule, but they're flipping every other Wednesday which classes they're going to based on that schedule. And so to some extent, that's kind of what we're doing at the high school now. I know that the high school team is looking at collecting data, collecting voice on the block schedule, and their team is just getting started in working through that process. At the end of the day, I believe that that's a high school decision led by experts at that level, and I look forward to supporting them in whatever decision they make that they think is best for kids, supported by the data.
All right, and so at this time we are closing in on questions. Questions are starting to wrap up. We have about 150 comments that have come in. I want to just thank everyone that has asked all these really thoughtful questions. I'm just going to collect some of the random questions that we missed throughout this session until we get towards 6 o'clock, and then I'll let Superintendent Carpenter say any final words he has. But one of our questions was, can we get rid of state testing?
Sure, why not? Unfortunately, no, we cannot. And I'm mixed. I understand the thought and rationale behind the elimination of the state testing. There are several flaws inside Oregon's state testing metrics, and one of the things that I think is the biggest problem with the way Oregon conducts state testing is it's really only one snapshot in time. On this specific week of this specific year, we're measuring our kids on what they've learned, and that data on that specific day, on that specific week, compares the Estacada School District with other communities. And so, I think if we just look at state testing and approach it as it's just a snapshot, and it's where we're at, I put more weight and power inside of our essential learning standards and what our teachers do on Wednesdays now, but it will become Fridays, is in professional learning communities. That's where the real work happens, where we're measuring and guaranteeing that your kids are learning at high levels. And so state testing is a requirement. It's a snapshot in time. But I do also, a lot of the times, like the apples to apples comparisons. I want to measure how the Estacada School District is doing in comparison to the Sandy School District or the Westland Wilsonville School District. To me, that data point is also important because I want to make, as your superintendent, I want to make a commitment to you that your child who is going to the Estacada School District is getting the same opportunities and is competing at the same academic levels as other kids from other communities. So I really do appreciate that number, and I use that number to help as we make adjustments to our own systems to make sure that your kid is in fact getting the same opportunities. So I like state testing for certain reasons, and I discredit state testing for certain reasons. But I wish I had a wand to do something different, but that is out of my control.
Thank you. Our next question is, does Summit Learning Charter follow the same calendar, and do they plan to follow this new calendar?
No, they do not follow this calendar, and I do not believe they have intentions to follow this calendar, although I think it's important to note that their offering of school services, I think, is even more innovative than what we're probably able to be. So Summit is a hybrid virtual and in-person charter. On Monday, Wednesday and Friday, students at Summit Charter are literally taking their classes from home, not on campus. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, much like what we're proposing on Fridays to some extent, the Eagle Creek Elementary School campus is open for any child that wants to come onto campus and learn in person with their teachers in person, and that's optional. It's not required. And so again, I think Summit does an excellent job of catering to the needs of families. I think it's also important, though, I do want to say, just so that there's no confusion, that Summit Charter School is not full of Estacada kids. In fact, only 11% of their 1,400 students comes from the Estacada School District, a little over 150 kids. And so, the remaining 1,300 are kids from all over the state of Oregon. So there are many kids from Baker, Oregon, from Pendleton, Oregon, from Salem, Oregon, from Tigard, Beaverton, and Tualatin. These are kids that would never have gone to our school district ever. And so I'm proud that we are offering and partnering with Summit to offer a very competitive business model where thousands of kids literally are choosing to be a part of the Summit Charter and choosing to take their kids to the Eagle Creek campus on Tuesdays and Thursdays to meet in person. But the Estacada School District, in comparison to Summit Charter, are really two different conversations. But again, this comes back to the need to compete. Over the course of time, more families who have been allowed to work from home, who are allowed to work remotely, who may be choosing to engage in education differently, we need to offer some of those services to meet the demands and needs of our community. And I'm excited about that opportunity in my proposal to you today.
All right, and a good wind down question before we close out this evening is, where does the district go from here? Will we do another survey before we make our final decision? What do the next steps look like on this proposed calendar?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And by the way, if there's any comments out there that need to be shared, I'm happy to hear about those too. I can't see them. I'm sure there's positive comments and I'm sure there's negative comments, and I think both are important. And I look forward to reviewing those as well. So what happens next? As we promised, we're going to continue to keep all of our parents in the loop as different tweaks and changes and iterations of this calendar evolve. We told you in February when we released this that the Executive School Board of Directors will be making their final decision in the March school board meeting. The proposal is for a 3-year calendar, and so this would be next year, the year after, and the year following, ultimately taking us to the year 2025. Which is hard to believe, but that is the proposal. We will not be surveying. We've already done that, and we believe that this calendar reflects the voice of those surveys. And so at this point, we're collecting voice. This Facebook Live is an opportunity for us to collect that voice. I encourage you to email me and to reach out to our school board of directors as they contemplate this decision, which is a big decision, a decision that they're taking very seriously, and they want to make sure that this is a calendar that truly reflects the vision and values of our community, but still puts our kids first. And I'm very proud of their focus and motivation in that direction. So at this point, we're just listening, we are learning, we're making some adjustments based on some feedback that we're receiving both internally and externally when it comes to this calendar. But at this point, we're continuing to move forward. The support really has been pretty strong for this calendar. And so we want to continue to work with people who are opposed to this to see how best we can attempt to support that without compromising what we think where the majority of our parents are at right now.
All right, thank you. One other question I did want to tack on, because I think it's a really good one to sum up this, is if this doesn't work out well, because we are trying something different and innovative, is the district stuck with it? Can we change it? Or are we committed to this for the next 3 years? What does that look like?
The answer is yes, we can absolutely change it. And first of all, I appreciate that question, and I appreciate the support of being open-minded and willing to try something new based on what the data, what student voice, what employee voice, and ultimately what parent voice is leading us to. Like, that's great. Let's give that a try and let's see how this goes. But at the end of the day, it's our calendar and it's our community. And if the data is telling us that it's not working, if our parents are telling us that it's not working, if employees are saying it's not working, we'll have plenty of data and plenty of loud and clear signs that will tell our school district that we need to either adopt a different model, adapt to the current model that's in place, or just flat out abandon the calendar. And as much as I come to you today asking for support for this calendar, I have no problem coming to you later and saying, look, the data is telling us that this idea didn't work as intended. Let's go back to the drawing board. And that's the relationship and the conversations that we need to continue. And that's why we have these Facebook Live all-ins. You're here today because you're all in the Estacada School District. And I'm here today to share with you some major decisions that we're processing through. And we're sharing this process of the decision making openly and honestly. And we understand that there will never be a calendar that's going to have 100% agreement and consensus. And so we've built this calendar based on voice of our parents, our employees, and our students, and on data. And now we're making adjustments based on voice to support those needs. So I'm just greatly appreciative of your time. I greatly hope that these questions and conversations helped you form your opinion. You are free to choose whichever opinion you want in this process, but I hope that we at least provided you information today to make an informed opinion, unlike the Facebook comment from Mr. Alex today that made an uninformed opinion without knowing anything about their school district. Maggie, is there anything else?
It looks like questions are winding down, and I think we addressed many of the main themes this evening. So thank you for taking the time. If there's any closing comments you'd like to make, I also want to note that we have a frequently asked questions document that is on our website, and we will be continuing to add to that based off of a lot of the great questions you provided today so that families that weren't able to make this session can learn from what was discussed this evening. So Superintendent Carpenter, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your commitment. I hope that this is a service that you appreciate as we work through big decisions together as one community. Not only do I work and love the Estacada School District, I also live here. My kids will be going through this calendar as well, and I'm invested personally into the success of the Estacada School District, and I truly do believe that this will set us up for long-term success. And so I hope that you've received some information to help you as you make your own decision. Like I said, I can't read the comments. I hope that they were on task and respectful, because at the end of the day, I'm here vulnerably in front of you, working through some big decisions that affect you. They affect your family, they affect our community, and ultimately, I hope they positively affect the outcomes of the children who are going through our community's schools. Have a great Tuesday night. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and I look forward to more conversations about our proposed school calendar. Have a good night.